Good morning, Central Baptist Church family. I'm down at the Central Baptist Church Pavilion this beautiful Friday morning, and I hope you enjoyed your reading of Romans chapter 9. There is a lot of intense theological discussion here. I think most importantly is that Paul is talking to Israel. He's talking to the nation of Israel, and it's important for us to remember as New Testament believers that Israel's still God's chosen people. God chose Israel and he gave them promises, and those promises, many are still yet to be fulfilled, which means that God is still going to fulfill his promises with Israel in the future, and that would be the end times events. And so he's kind of addressing Israel here, and he's trying to help them understand, these Israelites, these Jews who've started to convert over to Christianity. He's trying to help them understand, listen, you're not automatically a believer just because you were born a Jew. And he's trying to clarify that in some of this information. That's why he says, it's with great heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart in verse 2, for I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh. Like he's like, I would die for these people. I love them and I want them to understand the truth. Now that's not the verse that we're going to emphasize. I just wanted you to understand there's a lot of theological and intense material here in this chapter. But the verses I want to focus on are starting in verse 13. Paul says, as it is written, because he's speaking to Jews, he's trying to relate to them, to say something that they would connect with. He says, as it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. This is a common verse. We've heard it before. Verse 14, what shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. Is there then unrighteousness with God? The question he's posing is it okay for God to say, I hate an unrighteous person? That's a pretty intense statement, isn't it? And he's speaking to these Israelites, these Jewish believers, converts who would understand who Jacob and Esau were, and they would understand that they came from the same father, they came from the same lineage, but there was obviously a difference in their character. There's a difference in their direction of life. There's a difference in everything about them. And God says, Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated. Now, the tough part about this passage is Calvinists will have a field day with this. This is most certainly talking about God's sovereignty and God's influence over man. And so they look at a passage like this and say, oh, okay, well, God has obviously chosen people to be saved and be blessed and be used by him, and he's chosen people to not be saved and to continue on being sinners. But we don't interpret Scripture just loosely based off of a few statements. We interpret the whole of Scripture. We interpret Scripture against Scripture, and we make sure that it is all has continuity and it all agrees upon itself, because we know that the Scripture is inerrant. And so this can't mean that God intentioned or purposed for Esau to be a wicked person. God didn't hate Esau just because he was predisposed to hate Esau. No, what it was he says, Jacob have I loved, because he knew that Jacob would choose a righteous life. Jacob wasn't perfect by any means, we know that. But Jacob, God knew this, God being sovereign, God being all-knowing, knew that Jacob would choose a righteous life, and Jacob would choose to believe in him. Esau would not. And also it's important to understand, I don't have time to, this is a really deep passage. I don't have time to go into everything here, but we understand that when it says hated, you can understand this from study, that it doesn't mean that he hated him unto death. It is he loved him less. There was a preference. Okay, God preferred Jacob over Esau. Why? Because Jacob was a believer. Esau was an unjust and unrighteous man. Is God unrighteous for preferring a believer over an unbeliever? Well, no, God is just, God is perfect, so God can't be. And that's why Paul says, God forbid. But then look down at verse 20, I believe. Yeah, verse 20. It says, nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? Are we, as the creature, able to confront our Creator and say, God, why did you make me this way? Why did you make me unrighteous? We don't have a leg to stand on, is what Paul's trying to get to. And again, I don't have time to unpack all of this. There's a lot of material here. We don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to confronting God about our lifestyles. What we need to understand is God is in control, and God's sovereignty is on full display in the form of mercy. See, we all make choices every single day, and we must face the consequences for those choices. If we make a sinful choice, there's going to be a consequence for our sin. There's going to be destruction. There's going to be punishment. Okay? We can't blame God for the punishment that we brought upon ourselves by choosing a sinful lifestyle. That was our choice. Now, God's sovereignty is on display in that God is merciful to us. God, without being obligated, chooses to forgive us of sin. That's incredible, and that's awesome. So I just want to challenge you, just remember, don't be upset at God when things go wrong. Don't be upset at God when bad things are happening in your life and you're facing God's wrath and you feel like, why is God mad at me? You chose this life, and you've chose sin. And so if we make sinful choices, we can't be upset at God for allowing sinful things to happen to us. Instead, what we need to do is we need to be appreciative of God's mercy. And we need to just follow God's plan. If we are repentant, if we are obedient, if we are following God in every way we possibly can, then we're not going to face God's wrath. Why? Because God is merciful. We don't deserve that mercy. God chose to give that to us, and that's incredible. So I just want to challenge you with that today. I just encourage you, again, it's kind of a deeper theological truth, probably not going to be the most popular video in this Romans series, but just remember that God is in control of all things, and what God chose to do with his control is to show you mercy when you choose to be sinful. And I think that's incredible.